Hi, you're listening to the Technology for Mindfulness Podcast, episode 70, hosted by me, Robert Plotkin. I'm really excited that starting today, we're going to be posting videos of our podcast interviews on YouTube. So check out and subscribe to our new YouTube channel. And as always, go to our website at technologyformindfulness.com to get free tips for beating digital distraction and for being more focused and productive and creative and just happy generally in your digital life. Today on the podcast, I'm going to be speaking with Charlie Hartwell, the managing partner of Bridge Builders Collaborative. Charlie is part of a group of successful investors who've been investing in startup companies in the space of mental wellness, consciousness, and spirituality. You can find out more about Charlie at shiftit.com. That's shiftit.com. I'm extremely pleased to welcome Charlie Hartwell to the Technology for Mindfulness podcast. Hi, Charlie, and welcome to the Technology for Mindfulness podcast.
Hey, Robert. It's good to be here. Thank you for this time today.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm really glad to have you because you bring a new perspective to the podcast. We've had 65 plus episodes. We've had people from the tech world, but you bring a real broader perspective to this as someone who invests in mindfulness related companies and who can see and is involved in helping to guide the direction of the industry. I wonder if you could just start out by giving our listeners and viewers a little bit of background, about what you do, what your involvement has been, and we can take it from there.
Great. So I'm the managing partner of something called the Bridge Builders Collaborative, which is a group that got together about 9 years ago when the science of contemplative practice and mindfulness was getting to a stage where the science was proving the efficacy of the practices. And the investors that I work with, the original investors, were three gentlemen named Scott Krins, Jeff Walker, and Austin Hurst. And they sort of said they were involved in the Mind and Life Institute, which my wife got me involved in. And they said, to create social impact, how do we take the science and bring applications out to market? And the best way they thought to do that was to invest in startup companies. And so I got involved because they had this vision and they needed somebody to answer the question, is there anything to invest in this space? And they found me. And it was really started with a question: can you help us find things to help scale through investment? So, 8 years later, we've invested in 12 companies. We have 7 partners, and the industry movement words are limiting here, but whatever that is going to scale globally.
Yeah, and you've invested in some of the big name companies that people know about, Headspace and Insight Timer, and we've had Christopher Plowman on here. And as you said, there's just been such a sea change in a relatively short period of time from mindfulness being something that was maybe considered more on the fringes, not a lot of people engaged in. And now some of these apps have many, many millions of people using them. Tell people just a little bit about what changes you've seen, in the industry from whatever perspective you think is interesting, in terms of what developments there have been.
Yeah, maybe the best way to talk about that is kind of the way that I look at things. When you create a global movement or scale, how do you get ideas, concepts, companies, whatever, through the distribution systems of how this third dimensional reality works on our planet? And when I look at the companies that we've invested in and some of the ways that we've supported those companies, it's been to show the efficacy to companies, to go and do even deeper dives with insurance companies, with the healthcare system. All of those distribution systems take different amount of investment and time to help them to either pilot, these type of solutions or bring it into their, to their channels, to their employees, et cetera. And so over the years, I think that whether that's those distribution systems or the education system or the military all of them have had different paths of why they brought these kind of solutions in. And I think what they're seeing is that if the solutions are done in a way where the UX is really good and people enjoy it, that their employees or people on their teams, customers, etc., they see different types of benefits from these solutions. And so they're not only bringing them in, they're bringing them in for very different reasons. And all of that, I think, has created a large and still early stage movement to making this, to making things like mindfulness and contemplative practice mainstream.
Yeah, that's really interesting. On this podcast, we're often focused on the experience of the individual end user of these products, what the benefits are for them, maybe challenges are for them. So, it's great that you're telling us about the other perspective, from the perspective of a company like a Headspace or Insight Timer trying to grow and scale, the challenges they might have getting their message across to a different type of customer, like you mentioned, insurance companies or healthcare providers, schools. What are some of those challenges, and how have they had to be overcome, maybe in any surprising ways?
Yeah. Well, the first challenge, and this is more years ago, is just to help people to understand that there was actual science, so that for people. For consumers, it's one thing, but if you're going to take this into an organization or into a healthcare setting where you're going to recommend, these types of solutions, you need some efficacy. And so the science was absolutely instrumental. And really, the science had to translate from the science of mindfulness to the science of the actual solution. And that solution was not just about whether it worked, but whether it's engaging. Because you can have something that really works scientifically to help someone, but if they don't actually use it, then it's not going to create the benefit that you want. So in a lot of companies, they had to, as people were selling these programs, they had to show the science, they had to show the efficacy, and then over a period of time, they had to show that employees wanted this, would use it, and we're benefiting from it.
Yeah, I mean, we all know that with all technologies these days, apps and otherwise, people have a lot of choices, including the choice to not engage. I work with a lot of companies in my legal practice, and they're constantly aware of the fact that at any moment, someone who's actively using their product can stop. Yeah. Nothing binding them to keep going. But it sounds like, you've said that the companies you're working with have had a lot of successes in this. It must be because they work well for the people using the software. Have there been ways that you can speak about in which any of the products have had to be maybe tailored in different ways, or the training related to them has had to be tailored in certain ways to these different contexts in which they're used?
That's a great question. I may not answer it perfectly. I think in every situation you're actually tailoring it. So for two of our companies, like Pear Therapeutics and Happify, they've had to tailor their product so that it gets ready to be approved by the FDA, so that the science is that good, so that they can use their solution to be able to show that the FDA, believes in the rigor behind the programs. And then, then you have to go, once you've gotten that FDA approval, then you need to go to doctors like a drug company would and say, here's how you use this. Here's how it have benefits. Here's how to write a prescription for software. And, so there is software that includes mindfulness that's been approved by FDA, and it actually is going into doctors' offices. So that's one way of customing. Another is to go into a regular organization, like a company, and say, what is it that you need? What are your pain points? So if you're running a nuclear facility, you want people to be focused. safety is your number one issue. And so you're customizing a solution so that employees can use your product to really get focused, to have clarity, to be more in the moment. Whereas for someone who in the legal profession, and I think a lot of legal, you're a counsel, and a lot of counsel, they want their employees, their lawyers, to be better listeners, to be more present to what is happening in a courtroom setting. So for each different company, you need to customize it for the needs of those employees. And one of the benefits that I have found in these solutions is there are so many different reasons why products or solutions might be helpful. It might improve customer service. It might be something, to help improve or reduce anxiety or depression. It might improve productivity. Could be around safety. I came up with a list of like 16 different benefits. And if one of our companies is really listening to the marketplace, they'll customize to the needs of that client.
Yeah. And I'm curious to know also what kinds of, I'd say, internal challenges there might be. I'm sure you're dealing with people within these companies, the founders or otherwise, who are coming from maybe a traditional mindfulness background. Maybe they're familiar with teaching meditation in a small face-to-face setting. I suspect they may already feel some internal tension about launching a product in the first place. Now you're talking about doing it on a large scale through a corporate setting where maybe they have to tailor how the teaching is being delivered to different kind of customers. Are there, I'll just say, organizational challenges there in making sure everyone within that team is on board, aligned, and make sure that they feel comfortable with how this is all working. I have spoken to some other people on other podcasts about this, maybe almost cultural dynamic that can go on trying to bring mindfulness, which has been a much more individual, spiritual practice for many people, and then trying to bring it more mainstream into the product setting. Maybe I'm not being entirely clear, but I think you probably know what I'm asking about.
Let me see if I can. So this was a more of a problem early on, at least as I experienced it. It was, when these practices were beginning to go to mainstream, there were many people, particularly in the Buddhist communities, and in that were taught these from an Eastern perspective, that were very concerned about how it would come into a Western society. Yeah. They were very concerned about exchanging money for it, and they were concerned about whether you would lose the rigor, as some would argue happened in yoga. Mm-hmm. And I think those are sort of early challenges. And I also think that so as this movement has progressed so quickly, there has been some backlash, that I've seen, articles about mindfulness, etc. But I have to say, having been involved in a bunch of different global movements, there has been less resistance, less skepticism than I ever anticipated with something coming, this mainstream this quickly. So what, a resistance in a company might be, I think it's less about whether or not, they're commercializing an Eastern practice, that's from lineages, and more so, I think the industry could face challenges about what claims are you making against it. Yeah. So if you're saying this is, going to help you, then you need to have specific proof. And my sense is that as the movement continues to grow and it gets more competitive, et cetera, that is a challenge that we're going to face, is what are the claims that you're making? And at some point, the FTC or the powers that be, they might actually weigh in on that.
I was just going to ask, I would assume at some point, if you were to want to say something like, this cures addiction, that's a medical claim that you probably need to have substantiated in a certain way, or even treats, whether it's cures or not. But Yeah. Okay. Very interesting. Do you have any idea from your experience why there was maybe less resistance than in other cases? It's interesting to hear.
So that's a really good question. My sense is that part of it is that our need for these solutions, our stress levels as a society are so high that, and the reasons why people are integrating these, these solutions are because there are very big problems that we
Right.
face. And so if these types of solutions are making their way and helping people in some way, and people are seeing benefit from it, then that's a good thing.
Yeah. Just a few years ago, I went back and read John Kabat-Zinn's Full Catastrophe Living, the 40th anniversary edition of it. And there was an introduction by someone, I'm not remembering exactly who he was, but I think he was a Western Buddhist monk who talked about his initial skepticism to MBSR back in the 70s, and how he was won over by exactly what you said, the ways in which he saw it helping people in their lives. And to paraphrase, he said something to the effect of, if our goal is to alleviate suffering, MBSR was doing a lot of that. And so he came around to being really supportive of it because the proof was in the pudding.
Yeah. And John's a good friend, and what I really appreciate, and I think another reason that this has had less backlash is there was early concern that this was a marketing tool for Buddhism.
Right.
And John, I think, was pretty instrumental in taking a practice and making it, secular.
Right.
And then doing the research behind it. And my sense is, there will always be place for a Buddhist meditation app, for instance. There's nothing wrong with that serving the Buddhist community, but many of the practices, that we've supported or companies we've supported they're about secular. And mindfulness really isn't, at the end of the day, about Buddhism at all. I'm not a Buddhist. But I appreciate the wisdom of the tradition, but really we probably wouldn't invest in something that's a Buddhist app. We want to invest in things that have scientific validation to help people.
Yeah. And so I wonder, so the fact that these are helping people, I think, is beyond question at this point. I wonder if you could speak to, we talk a little about the past, about the present in terms of what are the current challenges. And as an investor, the flip side of every challenge is an opportunity. So that'll get us a little bit to what are the edges that the industry or some of the companies individually might be at now, the growth edges, the challenges, the limitations, maybe the requests that are being made from customers and desires, and where you see that potentially heading in the future.
So my sense, we've had many years, and I'm going to talk about this from an industry perspective.
Sure.
A global industry is being created, and there are something like 3,000 mindfulness apps. And many of them, hundreds of them, are out trying to raise capital. And at the end of the day, while many might be small, sort of small, successful niche products, there are not going to be 20 leading mindfulness apps. So one of the challenges now is, how do you differentiate your product as it goes mainstream? And my sense is that it's going to be more and more challenging, for somebody to come up with a new idea to take mindfulness per se, to scale. I think that's already being done. It's going to be, Calm, which we're not investors in. They raise a tremendous amount of money. Headspace, which we are investors in, they're serious, players in this field. Insight Timer, we're investors in that. Those are sort of the top three as I see it. Then there are 3 or 4 underneath that are doing well and growing. But, I think it's going to be really hard to start another mindfulness concept. Then I think there is another challenge for even for mindfulness apps to say, okay, so we have a mindfulness app. Is that all we're going to offer, or where does that lead to? Having a practice is great, but if you're just sitting on a mat at home alone, at some point that's kind of limiting. So I see that where society is asking us to step forward further, are actually to go past mindfulness. Or some might argue, John, if John was sitting here, he might argue it's actually going deeper into mindfulness. But, what we're looking for at Bridge Builders is to kind of go beyond the, practicing 10 minutes a day on a mat at home, and more into connecting deeper with yourself and deeper with your community and deeper into your social wellness or your emotional wellness or your spiritual wellness. And really, what I'm seeing is a need for communities, because people don't know how to connect anymore because of social media and tech, the types of things you talk about on your show. So I think mindfulness, on its own still has a long ways, to go. It's going to continue to grow. But we at Bridge Builders are actually asking the question, how do we go deeper into the human experience and support entrepreneurs that are helping to sort of bridge, the human energies that make social change possible.
I'd like to follow up on a couple of things you just said. Both were about ways in which to work on going deeper. One thing you mentioned was communities. And I remember when I spoke to Christopher Plowman on the podcast, which I think was about 2 years ago now, that's when they were starting to work at Insight Timer on developing and growing the community aspect of the app. And people can obviously check that out. If anyone who's been involved in meditation face-to-face in a sangha or other group, knows the experience of that, meditating with other people, whether there is someone leading that or not, that has a different different flavor to the experience. And so I wonder if you can speak to, I know you're speaking from a community, from a industry perspective rather than about any individual company. But can you speak a little bit more about that community building aspect and where it might be able to go in the digital world?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, first I'll talk about Insight Timer. I love Christopher. He's one of my favorite entrepreneurs that we support. I love his vision. I love his commitment to the teachers on the platform. I love his commitment to community. The other day, for instance, I was done with my session. I actually use Insight Timer every day because I really like the community. Like, I get done with my meditation and I just had this curiosity. If I go through, you can see everybody that's meditating at the same time. And I went through and said, how long will it take me until I find meditators from 20 companies? 20 countries, not companies. And it was so fascinating to just see where all the different people were that were meditating at the same time that you were at. And I just love that concept of saying, I'm not meditating on my own. I'm meditating with a group that's, somewhere between, 8 to 10,000 people at any given time, and knowing there's like 500,000 other people on that platform in a day. That's like that's sort of a global field of energy as I look at it. So, but as I look at, our other things that we're invested in, we have a company called Fabric, which is really trying to build the social wellness category, because the loneliness epidemic in our society is so significant that what they've built is a tool to help you be more intentional about your relationships, more intentional about choosing who are the 50 people that up to 50 people that I want to stay connected with, and what's my intentionality around how often I want to connect with them. And, for some people, what's the best way of, having conversation starters with those people? my hope is that that's more of an early stage company, but they're filling a niche. I think that people are, feeling that they don't know how to connect with other people anymore.
Yeah.
And our traditional social media channels are not doing it for us. So we look in the companies that we invest in. It's one of the things we look for is there a community?
Yeah, I mean, bravo to you, because this has been the promise of social networking companies, is that they would bring people closer together by connecting online. And although that does happen to some extent, we all know about the downside or dark side of that, the ways in which people, on social media platforms can end up being connected digitally, but not emotionally or personally. So yeah, I really appreciate the effort to try to find, because look, personally, I believe that the technology has the potential to bring people together in the way that we've been promised. I mean, I don't think that's a false promise inherently. It's an incredible thing. I always tell people, like, look at this conversation you and I are having right now. It's
Yeah.
direct, it's focused, we're connecting individually. We'll be able to post this online and share it with lots of other people in a way that we wouldn't be able to do if we were just sitting in a room together. There's so much positive potential from all of this. We just need to catch up and find new ways of using it. But let me ask you about this other aspect of deeper, because when you use the word deeper, you also mentioned it in connection with individually going deeper. And we chatted for a few minutes before the interview and talked about the ways in which people, well-intentioned, can end up getting exposed to mindfulness online, and can end up over a certain amount of time staying at a fairly shallow level with their exposure to mindfulness, and not progress in a way that they might be more traditionally if they had a teacher who could be attuned to them and guide them and help lead them through the challenges and the roadblocks and the plateaus that occur, like in any other practice you might work on. It's probably lots of other reasons why people now get exposed maybe at a more shallow level over a longer period of time in some circumstances. So I don't know if that's part of what you're talking about, trying to develop the companies and the industries in a way that will help support people to go deeper into themselves. And I wonder if you could talk about that.
Well, it's funny, as you said, we were talking about this a little bit before the show. My wife, who I call the wisdom of my family, said to me, 2 years ago, you've been investing in the gateway drugs to higher levels of consciousness, and now it's time to go deeper.
Yeah.
And then, sort of, from a universal perspective, I was like, oh my God, she's so right, as is typical. If I listen to her, and then all of a sudden, even within our group, we brought on a new partner called Bo Shao. Bo was just in the process of launching Evolve Ventures, a $100 million fund on his own. I mean, he's a bridge builder partner, but he's got his own fund that's dedicated to spirituality and consciousness. So all of a sudden, the attention gets set. We find Bo, there's such resonance, and our current partners, start asking the question, okay, so great, we funded this industry. We funded things like Headspace. We funded things like the Muse headband and eMindful and other companies. And those companies don't need us as much anymore from a pure investment perspective. There's other investment dollars out there to invest in those companies. So how do we take things to the next level? How do we create conscious communities? How do we help people to go deeper into either the stories that they tell themselves, the conditioning that we all receive in our communities and families, when we're young, or the trauma that hold us back? And to your point, if you just are using a mindfulness app, you don't have somebody to challenge you. You don't have somebody to listen to you and hear you, and to be able to help you look at things that you may not be able to access on your own. So we're looking now for things that, will help people to have tools and resources and communities and even supporting, I mean, we're looking at supporting the alternative practitioner space. How do we help bring that, to scale in a way that it's not today? Because I think all that's really important. We're here in community, and community, we can't just do this journey by ourselves.
Yeah, that's really, really great. Yeah, it seems like it's the next logical step and has the potential to help support people in going deeper in that way. I wonder if there's any companies you're working with who do anything that crosses digital and in person. I know in the tech world in general, there's been a lot, of, let's say, apps that help people meet up at a bar. So it's an app, but it helps people in, I hate to use the term meet space, and that's an old term, the real world. And is there any thinking about that or current activity going on in the digital mindfulness or other types of health and wellness companies that you're working with?
Yeah, I think that's a piece. That's can you can I pause for a second?
Yeah, sure. We'll edit this part.
I have a 9-pound dog that wants to go outside for a second.
That's okay, no problem. No problem. I've been wondering whether my cat was going to be scratching. So
my dog is my, Cookie Monster's her name, and she's kind of my coworker.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So we'll go back. So first of all, many of our companies are sort of built to be a reference or an intermediary point between somebody that helps someone and someone else. We have a company called Glue that's really all about helping what they call champions to help people with personal growth journeys. So they're a technology that enables that, and they want to create those opportunities for that connection and make them actually better. Then there's companies like, our company Meet Mindful is an actual dating service for people interested in authentic living, yoga, consciousness, spirituality. So that whole thing is meant to get people to connect more on a romantic level. I think that, where like Insight Timer, I think they've announced this, so I hope I'm not revealing anything that's confidential. But their whole thing is, how do they support teachers? So there are 5,000 teachers on the platform. They're always thinking, how do you build, the communities and revenue opportunities for teachers? And one of the things they're going to do over the next year is to help to be able to say, hey, this, on the app, if you want to go on a retreat with Sharon Salzberg, here's her next retreat. Or if you want to go to this concert with someone who is a musician on the platform, you can find that right on the platform. So that people actually gets people off the platform and into communities of practice. I know that there are other people. I mean, our group isn't all investors in 10% happier, but a couple of them are. And one of the reasons why some of our members wanted to invest is because they actually are thinking a lot about this, like get people off of the app and get people into communities for a day or for a couple days and do this work together. Mm-hmm. Because I feel as though that getting people together in communities, in sanghas or whatever, I mean, it helps everyone with their own practice. So I think that our companies will increasingly look to how, if they're not connecting people now, they're going to connect people now. And they're going to continue to look at how to build communities.
Yeah, that's great. So we've been talking a lot about what's like at the cutting edge, what's coming next, what directions are things going in the mindfulness industry, community. And I want, very often at the end of these interviews, I ask people to give some practical advice to people. It's usually about what they can do in their own lives. Because you're an investor and you work with companies, I'm thinking of taking a little different direction, which is if there are mindfulness entrepreneurs out there, whether they're a teacher or tech developer or some combination of the two, would you be willing to share, if they were to come to you right now with a pitch, what is the kind of next thing I'm not saying specific business idea, but in general, what is it that you're looking for now in the next phase that would really knock your socks off from a new company coming to you?
Well, I think we've been talking about part of this. What is the community of practice that you're trying to create? And that doesn't have to be mindfulness community per se. It might be a group of people who are, recovering. How do we get those types of people connected? It might be people who are going through cancer. How do we get those people into communities of support? So what I would say to entrepreneurs of what we're looking for are, what's the community of practice that you're trying to build? What is the consciousness? What is your level of consciousness? How much work have you actually done? How much are you willing to continue to do your own personal work around this? How willing are you to go deeper? When we see big egos, we tend to walk away, even if the idea is really good, because we're looking for integrated people where it's not all about them. It's really about their teams and their mission, and that, they're able to, collaborate versus an old hierarchical structure that I learned in business school, which is about, sort of this dominant suppression model of one man typically leading an organization and having all the answers. That doesn't work for us anymore. So how do people collaborate? Then we look at how is your product or solution going to improve the collective well-being of society, and what change are you going to create? So, you can go into nuances there of saying, okay, so what's differentiated about your product, versus what else is out there? What's kind of ownable that is your intellectual property? So I look at all those kind of things, but, that in general, that's the type of things that we're looking for.
Excuse me.
Oh.
That's okay.
And you need to keep an eye on her.
Okay.
You can call me when you're done.
Can I?
can tell
Okay.
you in the car, but I really.
Sorry, my wife is just leaving for 12 days.
Oh wow. Okay. I was just about to wrap up anyway, okay. So maybe we can. I'll just make a clean break.
Sorry. Okay.
No problem.
Love you.
Love you, honey. I'll call you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Is there going to be a door closing or something? I'm just waiting for a clean audio break. No? Okay.
Hold on.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, great.
All right.
Great. Well, that's super helpful. I hope that there are some budding entrepreneurs out there who've heard that and taken your advice, to heart, given your long and extensive experience in the industry. I really enjoyed speaking with you. Like I said, you bring a really different perspective to the conversation, which I think is really important. I know a lot of our listeners are using mindfulness apps, other health and well-being apps. They're mindfulness practitioners. I'm sure we have entrepreneurs, business people as well listening. I really appreciate this and all of the work that you're doing to help these companies develop and flourish. And as you said, the ultimate goal is to help people, and help raise consciousness and well-being throughout the world. So thanks, Charlie, so much for being on the Technology for Mindfulness podcast.
Well, great, Robert. Thank you for the time. Thank you for your questions. Appreciate, the intention of what you're doing and the audience that's listening. So thank you.
And just to leave people, I'm sure we will put everything in the show notes, but where can people find you, find out more about you and your group?
bbcollaborative.com is our website. And, you can find out about me on Twitter at Shifted Institute is the name of my wife and my business. I'm on LinkedIn. And those are places to find me.
Great. Yeah, we'll post all of those on the show notes and the website. So thanks again, Charlie. Thanks for being
All
here.
right, Robert.
Bye now.
Okay. Bye.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Technology for Mindfulness podcast with me, Robert Plotkin, and today's guest, Charlie Hartwell, the managing partner at Bridge Builders Collaborative. You can find out more about Charlie at shiftit.com. That's shiftit.com. If you liked today's episode, please subscribe to our podcast and our YouTube channel, and rate and review and share the episode with your friends. We'd really appreciate it. Don't forget to also check out our blog at technologyformindfulness.com to get free and practical tips for beating digital distraction and for being more productive and focused and creative and happy with your technology. And right now, if you go to our webpage and sign up for a free mailing list, you'll receive a free guide on how to manage your technology use and achieve balance with your tech. The guide is just full of simple and practical tips that you can use to beat digital distraction and take back control over how you use technology. I'm Robert Plotkin, and I'll join you next time on the Technology for Mindfulness podcast with Ashley Sumner, the CEO and co-founder of Quilt. See you then.